Imagine this. It's 1990. You're sitting in a Pentagon war room. Maps everywhere. Intelligence reports flooding in. Saddam Hussein just invaded Kuwait. The president's advisors are debating. One camp says, "We need to protect freedom and democracy." Another says, "We can't let this aggression stand." But in the back of the room, a lone economist slides a document across the table. It shows one thing. One terrifying reality. If Saddam controls Kuwait's oil, he controls 20% of the world's reserves. He sets the price. He chokes the global economy. Within weeks, 540,000 American troops are mobilized. Operation Desert Storm begins. The official story? Liberating Kuwait. The real story? Protecting the economic lifeline of the Western world. Here's what they don't teach you in history class. Wars aren't started by evil dictators waking up one morning deciding to be cruel. They're not about spreading democracy or fighting terrorism or defending freedom. Those are the stories we tell ourselves so we can sleep at night. The truth is far more uncomfortable. Wars are economic calculations. Cost-benefit analyses written in blood. Financial strategies disguised as moral crusades. And once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. Every major conflict in modern history, from World War I to Iraq, from Vietnam to Ukraine, has an economic engine humming beneath the surface. Resources, trade routes, debt, markets, industrial profits, currency control. These are the real reasons nations send their sons and daughters to die. And here's the part that should terrify you. It's happening right now. The same economic forces that drove wars in the past are building pressure today. Between the US and China, between Russia and Europe, between Israel and Iran. The actors change. The weapons evolve. But the script remains the same. Because at the end of the day, war is business. And business is war. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about this. If you found out that every war you were told was about freedom was actually about profit, would you still support it? Would you still wave the flag? Would you still believe the speeches? Drop your answer in the comments. Because what I'm about to show you will change how you see every news headline, every political speech, every military intervention for the rest of your life. Let's start with the most obvious one. Resources. Oil, gold, lithium, rare earth minerals, water. Every empire in history has gone to war over resources. The Romans fought for grain supplies from Egypt. The British Empire spanned the globe chasing tea, spices, and cotton. But in the modern era, one resource towers above all others. Oil. Black gold. The lifeblood of industrial civilization. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Almost every major Western military intervention in the last 50 years has happened in or near oil-rich regions. Coincidence? Let's look at the evidence. Iraq. Everyone remembers the weapons of mass destruction narrative. The smoking gun that turned out to be smoke and mirrors. But what they don't talk about is Iraq's oil reserves. The fifth largest in the world. 145 billion barrels. Before the invasion, Saddam was making deals with China, Russia, and France. Cutting out American oil companies. Threatening to sell oil in euros instead of dollars. Then came the invasion. And guess who got the contracts afterward? ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, American and British oil giants. The Iraq War cost the United States over $2 trillion. Thousands of American lives. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqi lives. But American oil companies gained access to one of the world's largest untapped reserves. Economic motive? Crystal clear. Libya. 2011. Muammar Gaddafi. The West called him a dictator, a tyrant, a threat to his own people. So NATO intervened. Regime change. Humanitarian mission. But here's what they didn't broadcast on CNN. Right before the intervention, Gaddafi was planning to launch a gold-backed African currency called the dinar. He wanted to sell Libyan oil in this new currency instead of US dollars. He was rallying other African nations to join him. If successful, this would have challenged the dollar's dominance in global oil trade. The intervention happened. Gaddafi was killed. The gold dinar plan died with him. Libya descended into chaos. But the threat to the dollar was eliminated. Syria, the civil war, the chemical weapons, the humanitarian catastrophe. But zoom out. Look at the map. Syria is the crossroads of pipeline politics. There were two competing pipeline proposals. One from Qatar through Syria to Europe, backed by the West. Another from Iran through Iraq and Syria to Europe, backed by Russia. Assad rejected the Qatari pipeline. He approved the Iranian one. Suddenly, Assad became a monster who had to go. The civil war conveniently erupted. Billions in weapons flowed to rebel groups. The stated goal? Democracy and human rights. The unstated goal? Control over energy routes to Europe. Afghanistan. The war that lasted 20 years. The war everyone forgot about until the chaotic withdrawal. The official story was always about terrorism. Hunting bin Laden. Fighting the Taliban. Building democracy. But Afghanistan sits on an estimated $1 trillion worth of untapped minerals. Lithium, copper, cobalt, rare earths. The same materials needed for batteries, smartphones, electric vehicles, military technology. China's been eyeing these reserves for years. The US spent 20 years there. Never fully extracted the resources. But they also made sure no one else did either. $1 trillion war to deny economic advantage to rivals. That's the calculation. And it's not just about oil and minerals. It's about who controls them. Because control over resources means control over other nations. If you control the oil, you control the countries that need it. You can reward allies with cheap energy. You can punish enemies with sanctions and embargoes. Resource wars aren't about taking the resource for yourself. They're about making sure your competitors can't have it. It's economic strangulation dressed up as foreign policy. Let's talk about the second reason countries go to war. Trade routes. The invisible highways of global commerce. You see, in the ancient world, empires rose and fell based on their ability to control trade routes. The Silk Road. The spice routes. Mediterranean shipping lanes. Whoever controlled these routes controlled wealth. Collected tariffs. Dictated terms. The same logic applies today. Except now we're talking about shipping lanes, canals, straits, and pipelines. And nations will absolutely go to war to control them. The Strait of Hormuz. A narrow waterway between Iran and Oman. Only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. And here's why it matters. 20% of the world's oil passes through this strait every single day. If Iran ever closed the Strait of Hormuz, global oil prices would skyrocket overnight. Economies would seize up. Stock markets would crash. This is why the US maintains a permanent military presence in the Persian Gulf. This is why tensions with Iran never really go away. It's not about nuclear weapons. It's about keeping that trade route open. Because closing it would be an economic doomsday device. The South China Sea. Another flashpoint. China, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, all claiming overlapping territories. Why? Because 30% of global maritime trade flows through the South China Sea. $5 trillion worth of goods every year. China's building artificial islands. Militarizing reefs. Asserting control. The US is conducting freedom of navigation operations. Sending warships through disputed waters. Both sides are preparing for potential conflict. Because whoever controls the South China Sea controls the economic jugular of Asia. Then there's the Suez Canal. Egypt. Connects the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. Saves ships from sailing all the way around Africa. 12% of global trade passes through Suez. When the Ever Given container ship got stuck in 2021, it blocked the canal for 6 days. The world economy lost an estimated $10 billion per day. Now imagine if a hostile power controlled Suez. They could choke global trade at will. This is why the British and French invaded Egypt in 1956 when President Nasser nationalized the canal. It wasn't about Egyptian sovereignty. It was about trade route control. The Panama Canal. Same story. The U.S. literally supported a revolution in Panama to break it away from Colombia so they could build and control the canal. For decades, the U.S. military controlled the canal zone. Why? Because it connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It's a strategic and economic choke point. Even after handing control back to Panama, the U.S. maintained significant influence. Because losing control of Panama would mean losing control of crucial trade routes. These aren't just shipping lanes. They're economic arteries. Blood flow for the global economy. And when you understand this, you start seeing military deployments differently. U.S. aircraft carriers aren't patrolling the world to spread democracy. They're protecting trade routes, ensuring the free flow of goods, guaranteeing that American and allied economies can function. Every naval base, every military alliance, every show of force is ultimately about securing economic pathways. And here's the kicker. As global trade grows, these choke points become more valuable, more contested, more likely to spark conflict. China's Belt and Road Initiative? It's an attempt to create alternative trade routes that bypass U.S.-controlled waterways. The U.S. response? Strengthen alliances in Asia. Increase military presence. Prepare for potential conflict. Because in the great game of global economics, trade routes are the board, and militaries are the pieces. Now let's get to the third reason nations go to war. And this one's dark. Debt escape. Economic collapse. When a nation's economy is circling the drain, when debts are unpayable, when the people are suffering, war becomes a tempting option. Not because it solves the economic problem, but because it distracts from it. It unifies the population. It justifies emergency measures. It resets the board. Germany, 1930s. The Weimar Republic was drowning in debt. Hyperinflation destroyed the middle class. Unemployment was rampant. The Treaty of Versailles imposed crushing reparations from World War I. The economy was in ruins. Then Hitler rose to power. He didn't fix the economy through sound policy. He fixed it through rearmament and expansion. Building tanks and planes created jobs. Invading neighbors seized their resources and wealth. War became the economic plan. Loot thy neighbor. By the time World War II started, the Nazi economy was a military Ponzi scheme. It required constant expansion and plunder to function. Stopping meant collapse. So they couldn't stop. Until the world stopped them. Japan. Same era. The Great Depression devastated Japan's export-dependent economy. Unemployment soared. Social unrest grew. Military leaders argued that Japan needed resources. Oil from Southeast Asia. Rubber from Indochina. Steel from Manchuria. They called it the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. A nice name for imperial conquest. The real goal? Economic survival through expansion. Japan invaded Manchuria. Then China. Then Southeast Asia. Each invasion was justified as economic necessity. The attack on Pearl Harbor? An attempt to neutralize the U.S. Pacific Fleet so Japan could secure resource-rich territories without interference. Economic desperation disguised as military strategy. Even the United States isn't immune to this pattern. Every major American war has coincided with or followed economic trouble. The Spanish-American War came after the Depression of the 1890s. World War I pulled America out of recession. World War II ended the Great Depression completely. The Vietnam War escalated during economic uncertainty. The War on Terror began as the dot-com bubble burst. War spending pumps money into the economy. Defense contracts. Jobs. Manufacturing. It's Keynesian economics with missiles. And here's the truly cynical part. War erases debt. Not officially, but practically. When nations fight total wars, normal economic rules get suspended. Debts get restructured. Currencies get reset. Creditors can't collect from rubble. The post-war period allows for economic reconstruction with a clean slate. Germany and Japan emerged from World War II with their old debts essentially wiped away. They rebuilt with American aid under new economic frameworks. Bretton Woods. The Marshall Plan. New systems for a new era. This is why some economists whisper about the unthinkable. That World War III might be seen by some powers as economically necessary. Not desirable. Not moral. But necessary. When the debt bubbles become too large. When the pension promises become unpayable. When the inequality becomes unsustainable. War is the reset button. The terrible, bloody, unthinkable reset button. Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Yes, there are territorial and security concerns. But look at Russia's economy before the invasion. Stagnant. Dependent on energy exports. Facing long-term decline. Putin's approval ratings were falling. Economic discontent was rising. The invasion changed everything. It unified Russians against an external enemy. It justified authoritarian measures. It distracted from economic problems. Whether it ultimately works is another question. But the pattern is there. Economic pressure. Internal discontent. External aggression. The fourth reason nations go to war is industrial profit. And this is where it gets really uncomfortable. Because we're not just talking about nations anymore. We're talking about corporations. The military-industrial complex. The defense contractors. The private companies that profit enormously from war. And they have influence. Massive influence. Over policy. Over politicians. Over the decision to go to war in the first place. Dwight Eisenhower warned about this in his farewell address. 1961. The former five-star general and two-term president used his final speech to warn Americans about the growing power of the military-industrial complex. He said, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist." He saw it coming. The merger of military needs and corporate profits. And he was terrified of what it would become. Let's talk numbers. The United States spends over $800 billion annually on defense. That's more than the next 10 countries combined. Where does that money go? Contractors. Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics. These companies don't just supply the military. They shape policy. They employ former generals and admirals. They lobby Congress. They fund think tanks that advocate for military interventions. They profit when tensions rise. They profit when wars start. They profit when wars continue. The Afghanistan War. 20 years. $2 trillion spent. Who benefited? Defense contractors saw stock prices soar. Lockheed Martin's stock increased 500% during the war years. Boeing, Raytheon, all saw massive gains. Meanwhile, thousands of American soldiers died. Tens of thousands were wounded. The mission failed. The Taliban retook control. But the defense contractors made billions. War is quite literally their business model. And it's not just American companies. Russia's oligarchs profit from military production. China's state-owned defense enterprises. European arms manufacturers. Every major nation has a class of elites who profit from conflict. And these elites have access. They have influence. They whisper in the ears of presidents and prime ministers. They fund political campaigns. They shape the narrative. Here's how it works in practice. A defense contractor develops a new weapons system. Maybe it's a fighter jet. They need buyers. So they lobby the government. They hire former military brass to advocate for the system. They fund studies showing how crucial this weapon is for national security. They make campaign contributions to key senators on defense committees. Eventually, the government orders billions of dollars worth of these jets. Taxpayers foot the bill. The contractor makes enormous profits. But now the military has these expensive jets. They need to be used. Justified. So when the next conflict emerges, there's pressure to deploy them. To show their worth. The weapons create their own demand for war. This is the Iron Triangle. Defense contractors. Pentagon officials. Congress members. Each supports the others. Contractors give jobs in key congressional districts. Congresspeople approve defense budgets. Pentagon officials get high-paying jobs at defense firms after retirement. Round and round it goes. And the result? A system that profits from war. That needs war. That, whether consciously or not, pushes toward war. Yemen. The Saudi-led intervention. American-made bombs. American-made jets. American targeting assistance. Why? Because Saudi Arabia is a massive buyer of American weapons. Billions of dollars in arms sales. When the Saudis wanted to intervene in Yemen's civil war, the U.S. supported it. Not because of humanitarian concerns. The war created one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes in modern history. But because saying no would mean losing arms sales to competitors. Russia. China. The UK. So American weapons fueled a war that killed hundreds of thousands. And defense contractors profited. This is the uncomfortable truth. There are powerful entities that benefit from war. That need conflict to justify their existence and maintain their profits. They don't want peace. Peace is bad for business. Tension is good. Conflict is better. War is best. And they have the money and influence to push the needle toward conflict. Not always successfully. Not always consciously. But the incentive structure is there. Clear as day. The fifth reason countries go to war is currency dominance. This one's subtle. Most people don't even think about it. But it might be the most important factor of all. Because the global reserve currency is the ultimate source of economic power. And nations will fight to protect that status. Or to challenge it. The US dollar has been the world's reserve currency since World War II. What does that mean? It means international trade is conducted in dollars. Oil is sold in dollars. Debts are denominated in dollars. Central banks hold dollar reserves. This gives the United States an extraordinary advantage. The US can print dollars, and the world has to accept them because they need dollars for trade. It's called exorbitant privilege. America can run massive deficits without consequence because global demand for dollars remains constant. It's an economic superpower multiplier. But maintaining this status requires force. Specifically, it requires ensuring that oil is sold in dollars. This is the petrodollar system. After the oil shocks of the 1970s, the US made a deal with Saudi Arabia. The Saudis would sell oil only in dollars. In exchange, the US would provide military protection. Other OPEC nations followed suit. Suddenly, every country that needed oil, which is every country, needed dollars. This created permanent demand for US currency. Anyone who threatens this system becomes a target. Saddam Hussein. In the year 2000, he announced Iraq would sell oil in euros instead of dollars. 3 years later, the US invaded. One of the first acts of the occupation authority? Switch Iraqi oil sales back to dollars. Muammar Gaddafi proposed the gold dinar for African oil sales. Libya was destroyed. Gaddafi was killed. Iran tried to open an oil bourse selling oil in non-dollar currencies. Subjected to crippling sanctions. Threatened with military action. Venezuela started selling oil in yuan and euros. Sanctions. Regime change attempts. Frozen assets. See the pattern. Threaten the petrodollar. Face consequences. Now we're in a new era. China and Russia are actively trying to de-dollarize. They're conducting bilateral trade in their own currencies. They're creating alternative financial systems. CIPS. An alternative to SWIFT. The BRICS nations are discussing a common currency. Saudi Arabia is considering selling oil to China in yuan. Each of these moves chips away at dollar dominance. and each increases the risk of conflict. Because here's the reality. If the dollar loses reserve currency status, the American standard of living collapses. The U.S. can no longer run unlimited deficits. It can no longer export inflation. It can no longer maintain its massive military without real economic sacrifice. The entire post-World War II order collapses. So the U.S. has an existential interest in maintaining the petrodollar. And that means responding to threats. Economically, if possible. Militarily, if necessary. This is what makes U.S.-China tensions so dangerous. It's not really about Taiwan or the South China Sea or human rights. It's about whether the dollar or the yuan will be the dominant currency of the 21st century. It's about economic supremacy. And both sides understand the stakes. China is preparing, building up its military, strengthening alliances, creating alternative systems. The U.S. is responding, pivoting to Asia, building alliances, increasing military presence. Both are preparing for a conflict that neither wants but both see as increasingly likely. Because the economic stakes are simply too high to back down. The sixth reason nations go to war is market access. Capitalism requires growth. Companies need expanding markets. Investors demand increasing returns. But what happens when domestic markets are saturated? When growth stalls? You look abroad. You need new customers, new markets, new territories. And if those markets are closed, you open them. By force if necessary. This was the explicit logic of colonialism. European powers conquered Africa and Asia not primarily for resources, though that mattered, but for markets. Captive consumers forced to buy European manufactured goods. The British Empire forced India to buy British textiles while destroying India's own textile industry. China was forced open by the Opium Wars because the British wanted to sell opium and other goods to Chinese markets. When the Chinese government tried to ban opium imports to protect its people, Britain went to war. Twice. The message was clear. You will open your markets to us. Or else. The American version was slightly more subtle. Instead of direct colonialism, the U.S. used military power to create favorable conditions for American businesses abroad. The banana republics of Central America. The term literally comes from the United Fruit Company's domination of Central American economies, backed by U.S. military interventions. Guatemala. 1954. The democratically elected government tried to redistribute land from United Fruit to peasant farmers. The CIA organized a coup. Installed a military dictatorship. Why? To protect an American company's profits. Iran. 1953. Prime Minister Mossadegh nationalized the oil industry, taking control away from British and American companies. The CIA and MI6 organized a coup. Overthrew Mossadegh. Reinstalled the Shah, who immediately gave favorable oil contracts to Western companies. The official reason was fighting communism. The real reason was market access and corporate profits. Chile. 1973. Salvador Allende won democratic elections and began nationalizing copper mines owned by American corporations. Nixon and Kissinger backed a military coup. Allende died. Pinochet took power. The copper mines went back to private hands. Thousands of Chileans were killed or disappeared. But American mining companies kept their profits. This pattern repeated across Latin America, Africa, and Asia throughout the 20th century. Any government that threatened American corporate interests faced coups, invasions, or destabilization. It wasn't about freedom or democracy. Many of the governments the U.S. overthrew were democratic. Many of the governments the U.S. installed were brutal dictatorships. It was about keeping markets open for American business. And it continues today, just with better PR, free trade agreements, structural adjustment programs, conditional loans. These are the modern tools of market access enforcement. But the military option remains available. Libya's Gaddafi wasn't just threatening the petrodollar. He was also nationalizing oil production and cutting out Western companies. Syria's Assad wasn't just blocking pipelines. He was also making economic deals with Russia, Iran, and China instead of the West. The logic is simple. American and Western corporations need growing profits. Those profits increasingly come from international markets. Any government that restricts access to those markets or threatens corporate interests becomes a problem. If economic pressure doesn't work, military pressure comes next. Regime change, sanctions, destabilization, invasion. The seventh and final reason countries go to war is technological advantage. Throughout history, technological superiority has determined victory. Bronze beat stone. Iron beat bronze. Gunpowder beat armor. Industrialization beat agriculture. Nuclear weapons beat everything. And whoever achieves the next technological breakthrough gains overwhelming advantage. Which means nations will fight to achieve those breakthroughs first. And to prevent rivals from achieving them. World War II was partly a race for atomic weapons. The Manhattan Project. Germany's nuclear program. Both sides understood that whoever built the bomb first would win the war. The US succeeded. 2 bombs ended the war with Japan. And suddenly America was the sole nuclear superpower. That technological advantage shaped the entire post-war order. The Cold War was defined by nuclear competition. Arms races. Proxy wars to prevent the spread of Soviet technology. The Cuban Missile Crisis. Countless near misses. All because technological advantage was too important to lose. Today we're in a new technological arms race. Artificial intelligence. Quantum computing. Hypersonic missiles. Autonomous weapons. Cyber warfare capabilities. Biotechnology. Whoever dominates these technologies will dominate the 21st century. And the competition is fierce. US versus China. Both pouring hundreds of billions into research and development. Both stealing each other's secrets through espionage. Both preparing for potential conflict. The US banned Huawei not just because of spying concerns, but because Chinese dominance in 5G technology would give China advantage in military communications and autonomous systems. The semiconductor war. The US is trying to prevent China from accessing advanced chip manufacturing technology. Because advanced chips power AI. And AI will power future weapons systems. Taiwan becomes crucial not just strategically but technologically. TSMC produces most of the world's advanced semiconductors. Whoever controls Taiwan controls the global chip supply. That's a technological choke point worth fighting over. China's hypersonic missile tests terrified the Pentagon. Because hypersonic weapons can evade current defense systems. If China achieves reliable hypersonic capability before the US, it negates America's aircraft carrier advantage. That's a technological shift that could change the balance of power. Which means the US must either catch up or find a way to neutralize China's progress. Pressure, sanctions, sabotage, or war. Cyber warfare is already happening. State-sponsored hackers, infrastructure attacks, industrial espionage. The US and Israel used Stuxnet to sabotage Iran's nuclear program. Russia has attacked Ukrainian power grids. China has infiltrated American defense contractors and government systems. These are acts of war by any traditional definition. But because they're digital, we don't call them that. But here's the terrifying part. AI warfare. Autonomous weapons systems. Drones that select and engage targets without human input. Swarms of AI-controlled robots. Whoever perfects this technology first gains an overwhelming advantage. You can wage war without risking soldiers. Without public opposition to casualties. Without the traditional constraints of warfare. It's a military revolution as significant as gunpowder or nuclear weapons. And it's coming soon. Both the US and China know this. Both are racing to get there first. Both have said they'll use AI in military applications. The international community has discussed banning autonomous weapons. But no major power will agree. Because being second in this race means being vulnerable. It means losing. So the race continues. And as it accelerates, the risk of conflict grows. Because technological advantage is too valuable to surrender, and too dangerous to allow an adversary to achieve first. So there you have it. 7 economic reasons countries go to war. Resources, trade routes, debt escape, industrial profit, currency dominance, market access, technological advantage. These are the real drivers of conflict. Not good versus evil. Not freedom versus tyranny. Not democracy versus authoritarianism. Those are the stories. The narratives we construct to make sense of chaos. To justify the unjustifiable. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. Every news report about rising tensions with China, you'll think about currency competition and technological advantage. Every headline about Middle East conflict, you'll think about oil and trade routes. Every military intervention justified with humanitarian language, you'll ask what's the economic motive? Who profits? What resources are at stake? This doesn't mean soldiers aren't brave. It doesn't mean some wars aren't necessary. It doesn't mean there's never a moral dimension. But it means we need to be honest about why wars really happen, about who benefits, about who pays the price. Because it's rarely the same people. The politicians who declare war don't fight in them. The corporate executives who profit from conflict don't die in them. The financial elites who benefit from resource control don't suffer in them. It's always someone else's kids, someone else's homes, someone else's lives. And here's the part that should keep you up at night. All 7 of these factors are in play right now, simultaneously. The US and China are competing over resources, trade routes, currency dominance, market access, and technology. Russia and the West are fighting over energy supplies and geopolitical influence. The Middle East remains a powder keg of oil politics and religious proxy wars. Africa is being carved up in a new scramble for minerals and resources. The conditions that historically lead to major wars are all present. Rising nationalism, economic instability, great power competition, technological arms races, shifting global orders. The only question is whether we're smart enough to avoid the trap this time. Whether we can manage these economic competitions without resorting to military conflict. Whether we've learned anything from the 20th century's 2 world wars and countless smaller ones. The optimist in me wants to say yes. We're more interconnected than ever. Global trade creates mutual dependencies. Nuclear weapons make major war unthinkable. International institutions provide forums for resolving disputes. Maybe we've evolved beyond solving economic problems with violence. But the realist in me knows better. Every generation thinks they're too advanced, too civilized, too economically interdependent for major war. The Europeans thought that in 1914. They had decades of peace, extensive trade networks, cultural exchanges, royal families intermarried across borders, and then a Serbian assassin shot an Austrian archduke, and the whole system collapsed into 4 years of industrialized slaughter. The economic pressures don't care about our enlightenment. They don't care about our technology or our international norms. When nations face existential economic threats, when elites see their power slipping away, when populations are desperate and angry, the temptation of war becomes overwhelming. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And right now, it's rhyming in some very disturbing ways. So what do we do with this knowledge? First, we stop believing the propaganda. We stop accepting government explanations at face value. When they tell you a war is about freedom or human rights or fighting terrorism, ask the economic questions. Who profits? What resources are involved? What trade routes or market access is at stake? Follow the money. Always follow the money. Second, we demand accountability. Politicians who vote for war should have to explain the economic costs and benefits. Defense contractors who profit from conflict should face scrutiny. Media organizations that beat the drums of war should be called out. Transparency is the enemy of corrupt decision-making. Third, we support alternatives to military competition. Diplomacy, international cooperation, Conflict resolution mechanisms. These sound soft and naive until you consider the alternative. Because the alternative is what we've always done. And what we've always done leads to war. Every single time. But most importantly, we need to change the incentive structures. As long as corporations profit from war, they'll push for war. As long as politicians gain power from conflict, they'll choose conflict. As long as military spending is seen as economic stimulus, we'll keep militarizing. We need economic systems that prosper from peace, not war. That reward cooperation, not domination. That distribute resources fairly instead of fighting over them. This isn't idealism. It's survival. Because the next major war won't be fought with rifles and tanks. It'll be fought with nuclear weapons, autonomous drones, cyber attacks on infrastructure, and God knows what else. The economic competition that drove wars in the past was terrible. But it was survivable. The economic competition driving US toward war now might not be. The weapons are too powerful. The consequences too final. Yet we keep playing the same game. The great powers keep competing. The military-industrial complex keeps growing. The resource competition keeps intensifying. We're racing toward a cliff, and we know it, but the economic incentives keep pushing us forward. Maybe that's the most disturbing realization of all. It's not that evil people want war. It's that the system itself tends toward war. The economic logic, the incentive structures, the competitive dynamics, they all point in the same direction. Toward conflict, toward violence, toward war. Changing that requires changing everything. Our economic systems, our political structures, our values, our definitions of success and power. It requires nothing less than reimagining how human civilization organizes itself. Which sounds impossible, until you remember the alternative. So here's my final question for you. Now that you know the economic forces driving US toward war, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to look away, go back to your life, and hope someone else solves it? Or are you going to demand better? Are you going to question authority? Challenge propaganda? Support leaders who choose peace over profit? Because this isn't someone else's problem. This is our collective future. And it's being decided right now. By the choices we make. The systems we support. The truths we're willing to face. The answer to war isn't more weapons or stronger militaries or better propaganda. The answer is changing the economic incentives that make war profitable in the first place. It's recognizing that we're all on the same planet, competing for the same finite resources, and the only way forward is cooperation, not domination. But that requires something radical. It requires us to reject the idea that economics is separate from morality. That profit justifies any means. That national interest excuses any crime. It requires us to see the world as it is, not as we wish it to be, and then to have the courage to change it. The economic forces that drive war haven't gone away. They're stronger than ever. The competition is fiercer. The stakes are higher. And the weapons are more devastating. We're standing at a crossroads. One path leads to more of the same. More conflicts. More interventions. More lives destroyed for resources and profits and market access. The other path leads to something different. Something we've never really tried on a global scale. Cooperation. Shared prosperity. Peace as a deliberate choice, not just an absence of war. Which path we take isn't up to governments or corporations or military leaders. It's up to us. Every time we question a war narrative. Every time we demand accountability. Every time we support cooperation. Over competition. We're choosing the path. And the choice matters. Because the economic logic of war is strong. But human agency is stronger. If we choose to use it. The wars of the past were sold as necessary, as noble, as righteous. But strip away the rhetoric, and they were always about economics. About resources and trade and profit and power. The wars of the future will be sold the same way. With better technology and slicker propaganda. But the core truth will remain. War is about economics. It always has been. And until we change the economic systems that profit from conflict, it always will be. So don't let them fool you. Don't accept the easy narratives. Don't believe the speeches about freedom and democracy and humanitarian intervention. Ask the hard questions. Follow the money. See the patterns. And once you see them, share what you know. Because the only way to break the cycle is to expose it. To make it impossible to hide the economic motives behind moral language. That's the real battle. Not between nations or ideologies, but between truth and propaganda. Between accountability and secrecy. Between a system that profits from war and a future that chooses peace. And that battle is fought in moments like this. When you decide whether to accept the official story or to dig deeper. Whether to stay comfortable or to face uncomfortable truths. I know what I've shown you today is heavy. It's dark. It challenges everything we've been taught about why wars happen and who we are as nations. But I believe knowing the truth, however uncomfortable, is better than living in a comfortable lie. Because lies lead to more wars, more deaths, more destruction. While truth, as painful as it is, at least gives us a chance to change course. So thank you for watching until the end. Thank you for being willing to question, to think critically, to see past the propaganda. This is exactly the kind of conversation we need to be having. Not just here, but everywhere. In schools, in media, in political debates. We need to stop pretending wars are about noble causes and start being honest about the economic forces that really drive them. If this video changed how you see the world, I need you to do something for me. Share it. Not because I want views, but because people need to understand this. Every person who sees past the propaganda is one more person demanding accountability. One more person who won't accept easy justifications for war. One more person choosing truth over comfortable lies. And let me know in the comments. What economic factor did I miss? What war do you now see differently? What questions do you still have? Because this conversation doesn't end here. It's just beginning. The more we talk about the economic roots of war, the harder it becomes to hide them. The more we demand transparency, the less power the war profiteers have. The future isn't written yet. We're writing it now. With every choice, every question, every moment we choose to see clearly rather than look away. The economic forces pushing toward war are powerful. But they're not inevitable. They're human creations. And what humans create, humans can change. So stay informed. Stay critical. Stay engaged. Because the stakes couldn't be higher. And your understanding, your voice, your refusal to accept propaganda, it all matters. More than you know. Until next time, keep questioning everything. Keep seeking truth. Keep demanding better. Because the world we want doesn't come from accepting the world as it is. It comes from seeing it clearly and having the courage to change it. I'll see you in the next video. Stay strong.